Final update. Lita foretelling my sister she's not allowed to bring her homemade food to Thanksgiving because her cooking is ruining the meal. I left a link to the first part of this crazy story in the description under the video. Thank you all for supporting the channel and watching the video. Let's get started. Alright, here we go. Remember my sister and her unusual dishes? I have prepared an update for you, as promised. Buckle up, because this is a roller coaster of glitter, gelatin, and familial chaos. I genuinely feel like I lived through a Thanksgiving fever dream. I've tried to block it out, but it's impossible. Every detail is etched in my brain like some kind of culinary war story. My cousin and I have been dissecting the whole thing over a few drinks, and we've concluded that this saga belongs in a museum of family dysfunction. So grab a snack, not glittery sweet potatoes, for the love of all things holy, and settle in. This is going to be long, messy, and utterly unhinged. To set the stage, Thanksgiving has always been a big deal in my family. We're not flashy about it, but it's one of those days where everything just feels right. The house smells like butter and cinnamon. Someone always brings a cheesy holiday playlist. And the food, oh, the food. We stick to the classics because, frankly, why mess with perfection? Juicy honey glazed ham, creamy mashed potatoes swimming in gravy, stuffing that's just the right balance of crispy and soft, green bean casserole topped with golden fried onions, buttery rolls that practically melt in your mouth, and pies so good they could make a grown man weep. It's the kind of spread that makes you want to loosen your belt before you've even sat down. Sure, it's predictable, but that's part of the charm. Thanksgiving in my family is a cozy, delicious tradition, a celebration of comfort food done right. At least, it was, until my sister decided a couple of years ago that she was the second coming of Gordon Ramsay, or maybe Julia Child if Julia had a penchant for glitter and drama. Suddenly, our humble family dinner wasn't good enough for her anymore. She went on this crusade to elevate Thanksgiving, as if stuffing and pie were somehow beneath her. It started small: a quinoa salad one year, a tray of roasted Brussels sprouts the next. Harmless, sure. Nobody really touched her dishes, but we let her do her thing. Every family has that person, right? The one who has to stand out, who insists on being a little different just because they can. We chalked it up to her personality and moved on. But this year was a whole new level. She didn't just step onto the stage, she stormed it, spotlight blazing, armed with glitter, gelatin, and what can only be described as a god complex. The chaos started weeks before Thanksgiving when she texted me this elaborate, borderline delusional menu she was planning to bring. She called it her Thanksgiving trio experience, as if she were curating some kind of high-concept art installation instead of a family meal. According to her, these recipes weren't just food, they were culinary expressions meant to challenge our palates and redefine holiday dining. Her words, not mine. I tried to gently steer her back to reality. I reminded her that our family is pretty traditional when it comes to Thanksgiving and that, historically, her experimental dishes hadn't exactly been hits. I didn't bring up last year's roasted chestnut risotto that tasted like burnt glue, or the time she tried to make pumpkin souffle and it collapsed into a puddle of sadness. But nope. My attempt at diplomacy only seemed to stoke her fire. She responded with this passive-aggressive, almost condescending text, "Don't worry, you'll thank me later." The sheer audacity of it. As if we'd all been sitting around thinking, you know what Thanksgiving needs? More craft glitter and questionable flavor combinations. But I let it go. What else could I do? She was clearly on a mission, and nothing I said was going to stop her. Fast forward to Thanksgiving Day. I was deep in the kitchen trenches, elbow deep in mashed potatoes, the kind that are whipped so perfectly they could be mistaken for clouds. The smell of butter and rosemary was filling the house, and for a moment, everything felt almost peaceful. Then, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of my sister's car pulling into the driveway. A full hour earlier than she was supposed to arrive. I froze, potato masher in hand, my stomach sinking in a way that had nothing to do with holiday overeating. Early arrivals are never a good sign, especially when it's her. I didn't know what was about to walk through my door, but I should have braced myself harder. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and headed to the front door, already mentally preparing for whatever nonsense was about to unfold. Sure enough, there she was, arms overflowing with dishes like she was auditioning for an episode of Chopped, Holiday Hell Edition. 4 dishes precariously stacked in her hands, and a massive foil-covered platter balanced on top like the crown jewel of her chaotic masterpiece. The door hadn't even closed behind her before she declared, "I'll just take care of the table setup. It's going to look amazing." The confidence in her voice was unnerving, as though she were a magician about to pull off a trick nobody asked for. Before I could even get a word in, she stormed past me, her boots clicking against the hardwood with the urgency of a woman on a mission or maybe a dictator surveying her new territory. I stood there, stunned for a moment, clutching my towel like a lifeline, before following her into the dining room. That's when the real madness began. When I walked in, she was already mid-rearrangement, completely dismantling the table I had spent the entire morning setting up. My beautiful, honey-glazed ham, the star of the meal, had been unceremoniously shoved to the far end of the table like an afterthought. The mashed potatoes I had lovingly prepared were now relegated to a corner, hidden behind a breadbasket as though they were an embarrassment. In their place, she was unfurling a table runner that can only be described as an abomination. It was covered in what looked like glitter, fake autumn leaves, and some kind of metallic trim that glared under the dining room light. It wasn't even the kind of tasteful holiday glitter that might blend into the background. No, this was chunky craft glitter, the kind that sticks to your hands for weeks and makes you wonder if it's actually cursed. Then came the candles, actual candles. She pulled out these enormous, ornate things that looked like they belonged in a medieval cathedral rather than a family Thanksgiving dinner. "We need ambience," she said, lighting them. The flickering light bounced off the glitter-covered table runner, creating a disco ball effect that made the whole room feel vaguely dizzying. At that moment, I considered protesting. I opened my mouth to say something, but then I caught her expression, a mix of pride and determination that told me arguing would only make things worse. So, I let it go. Let her have her moment, I thought. Little did I know, this was just the opening act in what would become the most chaotic Thanksgiving of my life. And then came her piece de resistance, the unveiling of her first dish. With a theatrical flourish, she removed the foil to reveal what she called her glittery sweet potato mash. At first glance, it didn't seem too horrifying. The color was a little more vibrant than usual, almost unnaturally so, but I chalked it up to her using extra cinnamon or maybe some kind of weird spice blend. It wasn't until the light hit it just right that I noticed something was off. The surface was sparkling, not in a subtle, festive way, but in a way that made me squint, wondering if I was seeing things. What is this?" I asked, cautiously leaning in. "It's festive," she chirped, as if that explained anything. I picked up a spoon and took a closer look. Sure enough, the sweet potatoes were laced with actual craft glitter. Not the edible kind you might sprinkle on cupcakes, but the kind you find in a kindergarten classroom. Before I could say anything, one of the kids, blissfully unaware of the impending disaster, grabbed a bite and immediately grimaced. "This is crunchy," they said, their tiny face scrunching up in confusion. I grabbed a spoonful for myself, purely for investigative purposes, and instantly regretted it. The texture was horrifying, gritty and sandy, like chewing wet sandpaper. "Is this glitter?" I finally asked, holding up the spoon like it was evidence in a crime scene. She waved me off with an exasperated sigh. "It's non-toxic," she said, as if that made it okay. "It's fine. Since when is glitter fine in food?" My stomach churned at the thought of all the microscopic, non-digestible pieces making their way through our bodies. But before I could say anything more, she was already moving on to her next dish, completely unbothered. Next came her cranberry and oyster relish. Just typing those words makes my stomach churn all over again. I can't even begin to describe the horror that was this dish without feeling like I'm reliving some kind of traumatic experience. It was a gloopy, gelatinous monstrosity that shimmered under the dining room lights in the most unappetizing way. Imagine a mix of cranberries, oysters, and God help us some kind of jelly that bound it all together. It looked like someone had spilled a seafood platter into a jar of cranberry sauce, blended it into a chunky paste, and then decided to let it sit out in the sun for a few hours to achieve its final, cursed form. The color was a murky reddish pink, but every so often, you'd catch a glint of slimy gray from the oysters peeking through, as if they were trying to escape the hell they'd been trapped in. And the smell. Oh, the smell. It hit you before the dish even made it to the table. It was this overwhelming, briny stench mixed with an almost sickly sweet tang of cranberries, like the scent of low tide had decided to crash a holiday dinner. I caught a whiff of it as she proudly set it down, and my appetite immediately evaporated. I leaned back instinctively, my survival instinct screaming at me to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever this abomination was. Nobody dared touch it at first. We all just stared at it, silently begging someone else to take the first bite. My mom is one of those people who cannot stand tension at the dinner table. She has this pathological need to keep the peace, even when it's to her own detriment. So, of course, she was the one to reach for a spoonful. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for me to see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, but then she scooped up a generous portion and put it on her plate. Watching her try to psych herself up to take that first bite was like watching someone prepare to jump out of a plane. She took a deep breath, fork trembling slightly, and finally put it in her mouth. The transformation was immediate. Her eyes widened in what I can only describe as silent panic. For a moment, she just sat there, chewing mechanically, her face a mask of politeness that was starting to crack under the strain. Then, without a word, she reached for her water glass and drank half of it in one go. It was the most dramatic reaction I've ever seen her have to food, and that's saying something considering she once politely ate an entire plate of burned lasagna just to avoid hurting someone's feelings. The fact that she didn't even attempt to say something nice about the dish spoke volumes. She just set her fork down and avoided eye contact with anyone, probably wishing she could evaporate into thin air. But wait, it gets worse. As if the cranberry oyster nightmare wasn't enough, my sister unveiled her third masterpiece, pumpkin curry casserole. I should have known it would be bad just from the name, but nothing could have prepared me for the assault on my senses that followed. First of all, the appearance was unsettling. It was a lumpy, orangish-brown concoction that looked like someone had dumped a pot of chili into a pumpkin pie and then baked it until it curdled. It wasn't just unappealing, it was actively offensive to look at. And the smell? Oh, the smell. It was this bizarre combination of overly sweet pumpkin, overpowering curry spices, and somehow a distinctly fishy undertone that clung to the air like an unwelcome guest. I'm still not sure what she put in there to create that fishy smell, but it lingered long after the dish was removed from the table, haunting us like the ghost of bad decisions. The real kicker, though, was the raisins. Yes, raisins. Scattered throughout the casserole like tiny, shriveled landmines, waiting to ambush anyone brave enough to take a bite. The whole thing was like a fever dream of mismatched ingredients that had no business being in the same dish, let alone on a Thanksgiving table. Nobody even pretended to be interested in this one, except for my aunt, who, for reasons I still don't understand, decided to take one for the team. She cut herself a small square, poked at it a bit with her fork, and finally took a bite. The look on her face was pure regret. She didn't say anything, she's too polite for that, but the way she quietly set her fork down and pushed the plate away spoke louder than words ever could. I caught her glancing at the emergency rolls on the other end of the table like they were a lifeline, and honestly, I don't blame her. And then, the grand finale, the surprise centerpiece dish she had been teasing all week as her magnum opus. She made such a production of it, insisting that we would be blown away by her creativity and daring. I should have known it would be a disaster, but nothing could have prepared me for what she unveiled. With the kind of dramatic flair you'd expect from someone presenting the Hope Diamond, she slowly pulled back the foil to reveal a turkey gelatin mold. Time seemed to stop. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Even the children, usually immune to the nuances of adult tension, sat in stunned silence. It was as if the room collectively forgot how to breathe. The mold itself was, in a word, horrifying. She had taken ground turkey, pureed it into a kind of beige paste, blended it with broth and seasonings, and poured the mixture into a mold shaped like an actual turkey. The result was a pale, wobbly monstrosity that glistened ominously under the overhead lights. It was shiny not in a glossy, appetizing way, but in the way of something that should never have seen the light of day, let alone a dinner table. The mold was disturbingly detailed. You could see the faint outlines of wings and drumsticks, as though someone had skinned a real turkey and dipped it in jelly. As if that weren't enough, she had garnished the gelatin turkey with sprigs of parsley and a halo of cherry tomatoes, arranged carefully around the base like some kind of sacrificial offering. She stood back, hands on her hips, clearly expecting applause. Instead, there was a silence so heavy you could practically hear the mold quivering. My cousin, bless her soul, immediately started coughing into her napkin, an obvious attempt to stifle laughter that only made the moment more unbearable. My dad just stared, fork frozen midair, like he was witnessing a crime scene. I couldn't look away. It was like one of those horrifying yet fascinating videos you stumble upon online, the ones you regret watching but can't stop until the end. The mold wobbled every time someone shifted in their seat, as if it were alive. And the smell. Oh, the smell. It was this unsettling mix of overcooked turkey and something vaguely metallic, like the scent of a hospital cafeteria gone terribly wrong. The more I stared, the less it resembled food and the more it seemed like a prop from a low-budget horror film. I was half expecting it to start moving on its own. My mom, ever the diplomat and eternal peacekeeper, decided to take one for the team. She reached for the knife, cutting into the mold with a careful precision that made it jiggle in the most grotesque way. The knife slid through the gelatinous mass with an unsettling ease, revealing the inside a pale, rubbery texture that was somehow even worse than the outside. She forked up a piece, hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice, and then took a bite. She froze. The color drained from her face as she chewed, each movement of her jaw slower than the last, as though her body were actively rebelling against what was happening. Her eyes darted around the room, silently pleading for someone to save her, but no one dared intervene. Finally, she swallowed and immediately reached for her water glass, draining half of it in one go. My aunt, who is usually the family cheerleader, decided to follow suit, probably out of some misguided sense of solidarity. She cut off the tiniest sliver possible, speared it with her fork, and popped it into her mouth. The reaction was immediate. Her face contorted in a way that can only be described as primal. She clapped a hand over her mouth, gagging audibly, and shoved her chair back from the table as if the mold itself were about to attack her. "I'm sorry I can't," she said, her voice muffled but unmistakably horrified. It was the first time in my life I'd ever seen her reject food, and the final nail in the coffin for my sister's gelatin turkey dreams. That's when my sister snapped. Her face turned a deep shade of red as she launched into a tirade about how the family was stuck in the past and too closed-minded to appreciate her culinary genius. "You all just want the same boring, uninspired food every year," she yelled, pointing an accusatory finger at my mashed potatoes. Yes, my perfectly creamy, buttery mashed potatoes, the very backbone of Thanksgiving dinner, were now the target of her wrath. The irony of her calling my potatoes boring while she stood next to a jiggling, inedible turkey blob was not lost on anyone. She turned her fury on me, accusing me of sabotaging her dishes by not hyping them up enough to the rest of the family. "You never support me," she shouted, as if I were the reason nobody wanted to eat her cranberry oyster nightmare or glitter-filled sweet potatoes. The tension in the room was unbearable, but at the same time, there was an undercurrent of suppressed laughter. My cousin had her hand pressed so tightly over her mouth that tears were streaming down her face, and I could see my dad biting his lip, clearly trying not to lose it. Meanwhile, the gelatin turkey sat there, wobbling slightly, as if mocking us all. The tension at the table was unbearable. Half the family was trying not to laugh, and the other half was staring at their plates like they were contemplating their life choices. My sister finally stormed out, but not before declaring, "You'll regret this when I'm famous." After she left, we all just sat there in stunned silence. My dad brought out an emergency ham he'd been keeping warm in the oven, and we salvaged what we could of the meal. My cousin and I discreetly tossed her dishes into the trash after dinner. Nobody said it out loud, but we all agreed. This was a Thanksgiving to remember, and not in a good way. So now I'm sitting here wondering how this even became my life. I'll post photos later because you all need to see the turkey gelatin mold to believe it, but for now, I'm off to grab a drink or three with my cousin to laugh, cry over everything that went down. This Thanksgiving was truly something else, and I don't know whether to feel relieved it's over or brace myself for whatever fresh chaos my sister has planned for next year. Stay tuned for photos, it's going to be worth it.